Welcome back, I'm Captain Xavier, and the day has finally come to give EIR a complete overhaul. And when I say complete, I mean pretty much complete. This is going to be an interesting video. It may shatter reality for a few of you when you discover that I was not always a great modder. Some of you are aware that I'm still perhaps not a great modder. I'm a passable modder. I can do some good stuff. But this was my very first mod. I started this in 2011, and a lot of what happened in here is horrific. I barely knew how to solder. I barely understood circuits. I had almost no knowledge of batteries. And the Nerf community at that time was, the mod community that we know today was very different. A lot of the major changes, or the big things that have happened, have been in the last 5 or so years. Some of them were starting back then, but I didn't have access to those resources. I only had the limited resources that I had in Moscow, Idaho. I didn't have access to all of the worker kits. That stuff didn't exist yet. Metal gears didn't exist, springs and stuff. We were cobbling stuff together still. And I was making stuff up as I went in my very not complete shop. In fact, I didn't even have a shop at that time. I was doing stuff in my living room with almost no tools. And like I said, I had no idea what I was doing. And I did just about everything wrong. And then I kept adding to it and doing more stuff and still didn't really know what I was doing. I did do a complete overhaul once I had a slightly better idea of what I was doing, but it's still mostly wrong. And so this is going to be a humbling experience for me, looking back at all the things that I did terribly. But for those of you that are new to modding, this will hopefully be somewhat inspirational in that, yeah, you don't know what you're doing now, but as you go on, you will learn, and you can go back and revisit old projects and make them better. So what all am I going to be doing? Well, like I said, I'm going to be replacing most of the internal wiring because the soldering is horrific. The wire that I used was not good wire, and the battery housing, oh, the battery housing is going to pain me. It's going to pain some of you. You're just going to be rubbing your eyes going, what was he doing? And like I said, that was what was considered best practices 9 years ago. Or at least it's what was taught to me as best practice by the locals who probably had no idea what they were doing. The other, super noob thing about it, of course, is it's mostly black. We were playing a very specific role, and we had a very good relationship with the college security force who knew who we were, knew what we were about. I still did get campus security called on me once that I remember because somebody saw me out of the corner of their eye going around a corner with my full loadout, and they didn't know what was going on, and so they called security, as they absolutely should have. Luckily, we had interfaced with security, and they were aware that we were out there. They still responded, as they should. But nothing bad ended up happening. But I am probably going to give EIR a paint job as a result of this and add a lot more orange. There are some excellent lines on the Stampede that would be an excellent place where I could do this upper part and this lower section here in orange, as well as this part of the battery housing. It'll still have plenty of black, and we'll keep my orange and black aesthetic, but it'll have a lot more orange to be a lot less scary, and I might actually be able to take this to the big HVZs again, which I would love to take EIR to, like N-War or something like that. So let's get into it. Today I'm going to start by doing the internals kit. I've got the metal gears, I've got a 9 kg spring, and I've got the return spring. I've already increased most of the springs in here, but I'm going to go ahead and go to the 9 kg and the heavy worker return spring. I think I've got just doubled return springs in here. So I don't have problems with runaway, but we will see what happens. Obviously, I'm going to be upgrading it to LiPo. I'm tempted to go ahead. Right now, I've got a switch back here that allows me to switch between 2 battery packs. So when the first one got low, I could switch over to a second one. And I might make that 1S or a 2S and 3S. Just upgrade that switch so it'll have a 2S battery and a 3S battery so that I can change the rate of fire. And that would be kind of fun, I think. Now there are a number of different circuits in here that take different voltages, and that is going to be one of the trickier things to figure out how I want to upgrade that, whether I want to go with resistors or buck converters or just keep them separate circuits like I have now. It's already set up for that. The ammo counter back here takes I think 4.5 volts, and there's a UV LED in here that takes 3 volts. And so figuring out how I want to do those will be interesting. But for now, we're going to start with just opening it up, admitting to my shame, and then getting started on upgrades. This will be more than one video. Be aware of that. Alright. We're in. I'm looking at this, and some of it I didn't do all that bad in hindsight. I don't remember what that switch even does. No, seriously. I think this is the on-off switch for the shoulder cannon. It would appear to be. Okay. So, what have we got? A lot of bad soldering. But some of it's actually not as bad as I remember. I guess I may have done a better job of upgrading things the last time I actually was in here. But let's get into the main firing mechanism and get it upgraded. So I was right, I did just have a pair of return springs doubled. And it feels about exactly the same. So I'm going to go with the fancy one. See if it works. If not, I can add one of those. There's that. Now we go into the inside. No, I do not. I know people are going to ask. I do not plan to put a half dart kit in EIR. I want EIR to run on full length darts. And there's also a doubled up spring in here. I think it's a 9 or a 6 and a stock spring. Yeah, this one's much heavier. I am now going to be adding the 9 kg kit. Comes with a number. Items, replacement O-ring, spring, O-ring, gaskets, all sorts of good stuff. Plunger, head, pad. That's a much nicer O-ring. Definitely gonna need some lube. An important thing to remember when putting your Stampede together. The gears are going to be going down. The tab on the back needs to go down. The catch needs to go up. Okay. There is the bolt assembly. Upgraded. Lovely. Now, for the gears. And we're in. Alright. So in the gearbox, In addition to there being all kinds of gunk in here that needs to get cleaned. Lord have mercy. We are going to be replacing all three of the smaller gears as well as the gear on the motor itself. The big gear, they don't make a replacement for because it's beefy enough it doesn't need it. Hopefully. In the past, so much gunk in here. The gear that I always ran into the most issues with was this one, which was in two parts. The top and the bottom were two separate pieces of plastic that were just socketed together with a square socket, and that would, if you had a heavier spring load or you had a higher voltage, it would shear that square socket rather than breaking the teeth. And that's what I had happen to mine and had happened to enough others. So I actually shimmed it. I don't know if you can see that. I drilled holes in and then glued 16 gauge steel rod in to support it. And never again had an issue with it popping loose. And I've never broken the teeth on EIR, though I have had other people break the teeth on theirs, on ones that I built with similar specifications. It was kind of a factory question mark as to whether or not you were going to get a good one or a bad one when it came to gearboxes. But now we've got good Metal Gear sets that aren't horrifically expensive. And they are all different, and there is only one way that they will go in. Here it is. Yeah, I can feel the sand. Okay, gonna need to clean this gear. There's a lot, there are years of gunk in there. Using a brass bristled brush. Get in and get all that crud out of the teeth. Okay. Better. Now, we grease it. And we grease all of it. This metal on metal gears, it needs to be very, very well lubricated. Especially the metal on plastic gear section. Alright. Last but not least, we need to get that off so that we can put that on. You should be able to use a flat-headed screwdriver to get it off. Getting the new one on, that's going to be a little bit trickier to do it without damaging the motor. I also want to take that little blue board off of there. That's something I should have done many, many moons ago. Alright, my solder iron needs to heat up, and I need to moisten my sponge. So, I've got the motor completely removed from that unnecessary bit and from the housing, and the reason being that I need to hammer this or press this down onto the post, and if I don't support the post on the back side when I hammer on this, it's going to pop the back of the motor housing apart, and then the whole thing will be pretty much ruined. So we're going to use this odd-shaped hammer as a sort of anvil to support it, and then we're going to use this very small hammer and there we go. Now when the motor sits in the housing, the teeth will come up. just need to figure out if I've got the motor in there the right way or backwards. Okay, I got it right. We'll finish buttoning it up. Wait, no I didn't. I got it backwards, I think. Yep, I did. For it to work, this needs to go forward to pull the bolt closed, not backwards. Come on, let it go. Sounds unhappy, but we'll see what happens when we actually try to fire it. That's the end of phase one. There's a great deal that got edited out because I ran into an issue that I then spent several hours troubleshooting, and it was actually an issue that somebody recently, not really recently, I should get back to him, somebody emailed me with the same issue, with I think the same upgrades, the 9 kilogram spring, the metal gears, and the worker return spring, where it just wasn't releasing. It would cycle, but it wouldn't actually, the catch wasn't releasing, and so it wasn't actually firing a dart. And I ran into the same issue and was baffled because I did not have that issue when I built the half dart kit, which used the same spring, return spring, and metal gears, but it wasn't having that release issue. And then I remembered that that kit came with a replacement release linkage. So when the bolt moves forward, there's a tab here on the back of the bolt that engages another tab that's sticking up on the front of this release that then releases the thing. When the bolt is all the way forward, when it's fully in battery, it will then release. Then the gears will slip off because it's not a full gear, it's only have teeth on half of it. It will slip, allowing the return spring to slide the bolt back. It will recatch, and then it will cycle again. But it wasn't releasing. And I got it to release a couple of times, but it wasn't consistent at all. And so I broke it down, and with the diagnostics, they're like, okay, it's not releasing, so there's a problem with the release, most likely. And so when I started looking at it, the added force of the heavy 9 kilogram spring and the heavy return spring, all of that trying to force the whole system back while the motor's trying to push it forward, the main gear was releasing the bolt before the bolt had gotten far enough forward to fully engage the release in order to actually release the plunger. So I went with a fairly low-tech solution just to test it, and then it worked perfectly, so I left it. If you look at the tab on the back of the bolt, I have simply put a screw in it to make it a little bit longer, so it engages that linkage a little bit sooner and is releasing. And now it's firing just fine. So I'll email the guy, and I took a picture, and I'll tell him what I did. But yeah, it's now hitting 80, which is higher than it was. I think before it was only hitting 60. And I'd like to get closer to 100. 90 would be the minimum that I really, really want to get out of it. And so I'm looking at the various options of what I can do to get that extra 10 FPS. It does still have its AR in it because it is a Springer, and it is capable of dry firing when your magazine is empty. And with a 9 kilogram spring, I'd rather not be dry firing it, but we'll see. It also still just has a regular breech, which has all the issues of a standard Nerf breech in that it's only tight for the very last half of an inch. So I may try making a sleeper breech. I think I have a full... I've got plenty of extra Stampedes lying around, and I'm planning to gut one from another project anyway. So if I might have the internals from a Stampede in a drawer somewhere, and if not, I'll tear a Stampede apart, and build a brass sleeper breech one that I can drop in and test and see how reliable it is, because that's the key thing. I would be willing to... 80 isn't fantastic, but it's for HVZ, which is pretty much all at point blank range anyway. I can hit a man-sized target with this at 30 feet right now, and I consider that perfectly acceptable for HVZ. I'd like a little more zing, so it's a little bit harder to dodge, but I would rather have 80 FPS and not have as much range than try bumping it up to 90 FPS and lose reliability, because brass breeches in a Stampede are far more likely to have a jam, just because of the nature of trying, you know, if you have a slightly worn dart and it doesn't feed perfectly, you're going to jam your dart, and if your blaster jams at an HVZ, you're probably going to get tagged, unless you're, you know, on the ball. You know, depends on when the tag happens. If the zombie is rushing you and you go to fire and you jam and they're a foot away, you're not going to have time to pull out a secondary, and if your squad mate isn't covering you, you're tagged. So reliability is far more important to me than power. So that's the big concern on going with a brass breech. I'm willing to give it a try. If I can bevel it well enough that it will reliably feed even less than brand new darts, then I would be willing to give that a try. But I would need to be able to put 100 darts through it without a single jam before I'd be willing to take that into the field. So yeah, that's phase 1. Metal gears, return spring, 9 kilogram spring, screw in the release tab. Phase 2 will either be the battery housing, because it is an absolute tragedy, because I had no idea what I was doing back then. And possibly phase 3 would then be the pump. There's a leak up here somewhere, and I just need to track it down and seal it with glue or something. Yeah, I do need to check all of the wiring on the shoulder cannon mechanism. I seem to recall that it wasn't working. The wiring ended up not being nearly as horrific as I was expecting it to be. I had used a fairly heavy, solid wire. So I'm not worried about that. I've been firing it on a 3S LiPo all day, and I haven't had any failures, and I'm not expecting to, because there's only the one motor. Yeah, so battery housing, I plan to, I do want to keep the light and the ammo counter on their own circuit. Now, a lot of people have said, well, I could use, you know, resistors or buck converters and just run them all on the same LiPo. But I have a terrible tendency to forget to turn those off, and then they drain the battery. And I'd rather have them drain a AAA, you know, 3 AAAs and 1 IMR, rather than drain my LiPo to the point that it won't recharge anymore. So I don't have a problem having those on their own circuit. However, the main gun and the pump will probably end up on sharing a circuit. The one thing I am considering, like I think I said this in the beginning, is making it so that this switch switches between a 2S and a 3S to alter the rate of fire. And that would be, that I would really, really like. This I would probably keep on the 3S, possibly the 2S. I need to test them both. I don't actually have any idea what this motor is. I got it from a skinny bald man in an alley who worked at doing maintenance in a hospital, so it may have come out of an MRI, it may have come out of an X-ray machine, it might have come out of a blood pressure cuff. I don't know. But it works wonderfully. It won't pump up the tank to the point that it fires dangerously hard. I mean, it doesn't get nearly as much pressure as the bike pump will, which is why the bike pump is there. But it was nice in HVZ because I could use the main pump if I was firing rockets, because you really needed the extra pressure to fire a rocket. But if I wanted to fire, say, a single elite from the rocket post, this would only pump it up to a perfectly reasonable FPS, and that was something that I ran by the mods, and they trusted me enough to be careful about it. Yeah, that'll be fun. It'll be fun to do the rest of the upgrades. Make sure everything else is still working, clean up my wiring, probably a little bit, though like I said, it's not nearly as bad as I had thought it was going to be. I have downgraded a couple of springs, actually, as the result of trying to get everything to work. Back when I was trying to deal with Runaway, I had increased the trigger switch spring, and it was now making it difficult to actually pull the trigger. And I had increased the catch spring, which I've now downgraded because I thought maybe that's why it wasn't releasing. But it turned out that wasn't the problem, but the lighter spring is still working just fine. May end up putting the heavier spring back in the catch, but we will see. Turns out the real secret to preventing runaway is the bolt return spring. And I, in the past, had just doubled that, and that seemed to solve the problem. And I haven't had any trouble with runaway since. I am running on a 3S LiPo, which actually is a lower voltage than I was getting with the IMRs. I was having 16 volts with the IMRs, which is closer to a 4S LiPo. But the LiPo has a lot more current and therefore has a lot fewer issues. So yeah, gonna be fun. The battery tray is huge. I can fit a 2200 milliamp battery in here as well as a 2S in here and probably all of the other batteries in here, and it'll still be a heavy blaster, but that's not gonna ever not be the case given how much weight we have up here. It's actually nice having the counterbalance in the back. So, alright, I think I have blathered quite enough. I am very pleased with Phase 1 now that I got it working. And stay tuned probably next week for Phase 2 when I do the battery housing. Thanks for watching. This has been fun. It really actually has been very good for me to finally get into this project, and the fact that I was able to kind of shows that I'm on an upswing, doing better, found the motivation to actually get out here and do this, and absolutely loving it again. As frustrating as the tinkering with this was, it reminded me how much I loved tinkering with this blaster, and it's been way too long since I did so. Once I get EIR done, I have some big upgrade plans for tier that I'm going to need to talk to people with more expertise than me about. So stay tuned for that. Having fun. Thank you guys for watching.